watching Property TV.
Hello, welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and this is the show where you can have your property-related questions answered by a team of experts. And joining me today is John Howard, all the way from Ipswich, property developer, investor, mentor, and author.
Thank you very much. Great to be here again.
Good journey in, John?
Very easy. Less than an hour on the train.
Really? And what about the car?
Well, I've got a new battery car.
Yes.
Electric, I should say.
That's why I'm asking, because you're totally green now.
I'm totally green now, but I came in on the train today.
Okay, all right. Well, good for you. And joining John is Nicholas Zorpides, founder of Nicholas Co Surveyors. Welcome to you, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you back, as always. So we'll get straight on with the questions. And John, you're going first. The government seemed to be placing the burden of unsafe cladding fairly and squarely at the door of developers. Do the panel think that this is right, given that it's government-controlled bodies that approves or does not approve building standards in any development? Will this simply not increase the cost of housing in the future, with developers attempting to recoup these impositions?
Well, I'm very surprised at Michael Gove, because Michael Gove, who is now in charge of all this,
is this our 14th housing minister, is it?
He was Secretary of State for Housing, which is different.
Okay.
He is a very, very bright, very, very capable man, without question. And he is doing his best bullying the developers into paying even more than they've already agreed to pay. Because don't forget, some of these big developers have already agreed to pay £1 billion towards this, when really, in most cases, it wasn't their fault. If it was their fault initially and they didn't do the job right, that's only right, they should pay. But most of these cases now with the cladding are where it's had full building regs given to them by the council, you know, everything a certificate of completion, everything okay, and now they've changed the rules 10, 15 years later, the specification of what's required.
And this goes back 30 years, doesn't it?
30 years. So a friend of mine, who I won't say who they are, because they're considered one of the big national house builders. He said to me, his quote was, "If he honestly thinks that we are going to put any more money in, he can, you know what? We've taken legal advice and he hasn't got a leg to stand on." And what they're trying to do is threaten the large house builders into not allowing Help to Buy scheme anymore if they don't put the money in. So it's appalling, and Help to Buy scheme finishes next year anyway, April 23. But there's another scheme coming alongside it to take its place.
And do you think government should be so heavily involved in dictating the protocols of property development?
No, I don't, and I'm amazed that this government are doing this. This is more of a Labour, you would have thought more of a Labour policy than a Conservative policy. Bear in mind that the top 10 house builders probably donate more to the Tory party, or have done in the past, than anybody else.
I think you've hit it there, have done in the past.
I mean, it makes my poultry, what I give them every year, look very modest. So, you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think he's picked a fight
with the wrong people.
With the wrong people, without question. Without question.
I mean, I've sort of thought about this week after week, whether the responsibility does lie with the developers, and I keep coming back to the fact that any developer that obtains planning permission really has to go through the hoops now, not just in terms of consent, but in terms of progress of the development itself, even down to sometimes to the design of the hoardings that go around a site even.
Absolutely.
You know? Then you get into is the development green? Is it doing its bit?
It doesn't make any sense to me to do it like this, because these developers are already offered a huge amount of money to help when they didn't really need to in many cases. So to go back to them again and be so aggressive about it, it makes no sense at all to me. Okay,
let's go to the other side of the fence though. The long leaseholders that are faced with picking up these costs to date anyway, bought their properties in good faith from credible and sensible developers. with all those protections in place, NHBC guarantees and all that sort of thing. I think the number of companies offering these warranties now of 10 or 15 years is a lot less, isn't it? I think Zurich are out of it now, and
there's a few
people like that. But is it their responsibility? Well, no, it's not.
It isn't. But there's a very simple answer to all this. First of all, the government have already put a big fund available to help to help the lessees. Secondly, who own these flats. Secondly, why doesn't the freehold of the building borrow the money to get it all done? It's then paid back over, say, 30 years, the money, yeah? So a small percentage of your service charge every year would go towards the cost of the cladding that had to be put right. And whoever buys it just has the benefit of the fact that it's been done, and the service charge is slightly more than it would have been because they're paying it back on a loan.
You're talking to the wrong chap about service charges.
Well, you do. Well, I'm not saying where you live because we don't want all your fans queuing up outside. But however, you are in a very exceptional, privileged position with beautiful views over London. Not everyone's in that position, but most people would accept, I think, if the service charge has to go up 200 quid, £300-400 a year to cover the cost of a long-term loan.
And who would provide these loans? Government or council?
Yeah, the loans would be so safe because technically the freeholder's got 50, 100, 150 people paying into it. So it's a no-brainer for the government. The government could underwrite the loan, by the way, as well, or even be the Homes England could grant the loan. They've got bags of money to invest, and they're the property bank of the government's property bank. So I don't see what the problem is. And I'm amazed that these housing ministers and Michael Gove haven't come to developers like myself and Munich and other people and said, right, what is the solution? Because it's a very simple solution.
But you see, I mean, as you're seeing in the news this week over the criticisms of the handling of COVID, there's a fundamental flaw with our political system in so much that an ordinary MP becomes a minister and then he's expected to be an expert in that particular subject, and 9 times out of 10 they're not.
Absolutely.
Crazy. So you've got the wrong people trying to solve these problems, and I don't know how you solve it. What do you think?
It's quite a tricky subject. I feel for the leaseholders, but also for the developers, because as you said, it is not their fault.
Typical agent.
They had it signed off. But do I think it's fair that the leaseholders pick up the cost? Not necessarily.
No,
as you said, they did buy in good faith, and it is a large amount of money.
It's a large amount of money, Nick. So if you spread it over that period of time,
if you said it, and it's a few percentage points on their service charge, minimal cost, then that could be acceptable.
The government have gone about it totally.
I worry about loading developers, because all a developer is going to do is just load it onto the price of his next.
That's a bit harsh. That's a bit harsh. Sometimes you can't do that, although we'd like to.
Yeah. But as you said, the government have put a significant fund available.
They have,
for probably the cladding.
Huge.
So
it's hundreds of millions.
Yeah, in the billions. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, having put the world to rights on that one, Nicholas, your question. I have a rented premises for business, and the rent review period is fast approaching. Although the lease states quite clearly that rent reviews are upward only, given the difficulties we have all experienced over the last 2 years, would I have any legal opportunity of challenging this clause? And I'm just wondering whether in any way this fits into the new legislation that we're just about to receive on commercial properties, or whether he's stuck with upward only.
For the time being, we're stuck with it. If it's been agreed under the terms of the lease, then it's very difficult to make those amendments. There is a bill going through currently to remove upwards only rent reviews and to nullify current clauses of that, but that's only in the second reading at the moment with the House of Commons.
So that would be retrospective?
It will be. So it says, but again, it's only in the second reading, and so by the time it does go through Parliament, it's got a while. So currently, unfortunately, there isn't that opportunity. I would like, to make, I think, tenants going forward should be aware of the different types of rent reviews available. So there's RPI, there's CPI that goes on the retail price index or consumer price index. There is something that's quite popular in retail space is turnover. rent. So that's quite popular.
The new sort of come to the fore, really.
Yeah, it's been in existence for some time, but now obviously, given the market,
Do you know it has come to the fore? But I see all sorts of. I acted for somebody last year on this, and the difficulty is that to give the landlords is starting to say, well, I want the figures, I want the information, I want it now because I want to assess what this either overage or turnover rent is going to be. Yeah. The client then says, I'm under no legal obligation to do my accounts before 12 months has elapsed past the last accounting period, so you're going to have to wait. And the landlord says no and starts issuing arbitrary bills. It just ends in absolute...
It's a lot more complicated than obviously other ones. You can do a step rent, which is agreed rents of upwards over a course of a period. So I think I would advise tenants, look and take on commercial leases to understand your position, understand which one works best for your business, and try and negotiate accordingly.
And take your rose-tinted glasses off when you read it, when you're about to sign up.
Well, I think you're both being a bit hard and a bit cynical to put the poor old commercial landlord. I mean, what we must appreciate is that commercial landlords probably got a loan based on the rent that's coming in. Yeah. So if these new rules come in, then the value of that commercial investment is going to go down.
Of course.
If it's upward only rent reviews, I've just agreed actually upward only rent review with a new tenant. So that's good, isn't it? Yeah. But it's going to be scuppered by the government. I mean, this government is not like a Conservative government.
But no, John, you're one in a million. Government.
Well, that's very nice of you to say so, and but I'm not sure it's a compliment or not. I haven't worked that one out. But the point I'm trying to make is it's all very well for the consumer. It's all very well for the tenant. But what about the people who put their necks on the line to buy these commercial premises?
You take on all the risk.
I do think we did a programme earlier today we recorded talking about the new legislation which is there to assist commercial tenants with any arrears and difficulties that they've got at the moment. But I think the one key thing that's come out of this pandemic in a positive way is there is a much better relationship these days between landlord and tenant. There's much more propensity to talk rather than just issue the writ or go for the possession or sue for arrears.
Yeah, but then the landlord's got to take a view that he's obviously going to have a vacant property over a period of time, which diminishes the value of the asset.
Well, that's always the blackmail you get, Nick, isn't it? And that's all the blackmail you get. But from my point of view, I have a rule, and that is if my tenant is bigger than me financially, then they pay. If they're smaller than me financially, then I'll try and help and support them. Yeah. And during lockdown, the bigger tenants, which were bigger than financially than I am, were the ones who tried to take the proverbial. I didn't let it happen.
Well, on that heartfelt note, we'll go to the break. So join me again after the break, where we'll be asking John and Nicholas even more of your questions.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm with John Howard and Nicholas Zorpides. John, your second question.
Yes.
The government are suggesting that they will introduce legislation which will force landlords to let empty high street shops and commercial premises. Surely logic says if there are willing tenants ready to take the properties, government intervention would simply complicate the issue. For example, if any letting was to be forced, it may just attract a stream of unsuitable tenants, leading to rent arrears and further business closures. What do the panel think?
Well, Nick's probably got more experience about this than I have, but it's my question, Nick. So I'll go, and if that's okay, and then you jump in whenever you want. Because I think this is a complete and utter disgrace. And I hear a number of people saying what a great idea it is. It's in the Queen's speech. So technically, this is going to happen. The idea being that
hold on, that doesn't seem to apply to this government, does it? No?
You could argue perhaps there's a few issues, but basically, I'm still canvassing for them. I don't know how much before.
That's why I mentioned it.
Yeah, I thought you would. So the idea is that if the property is empty for more than 6 months, then they can, the council can then nominate a charity who would then rent, I think I'm right, Nick, in saying this, rent the property, and as a landlord you have no choice basically but to accept it. Now, I can't see how that's going to work in practice legally either, to be honest with you, because every time we have an empty shop and which we have to re-let, we have to get permission from our bank to do so. So if the bank say, you know, you're renting it for 10,000, it was 30,000, the bank may well go, no, you're not doing that. So you have to get bank permission. So unless you own it cash. So I can't see how this is going to happen. And I think it's a complete, utter disgrace this government is even suggesting it.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this idea either, to be fair. And I think also the covenant and strength of the tenant.
Yeah, well, that's the real issue.
Yeah, I think that's quite a big issue that I would foresee on this one. So I'm not.
It sounds like a Labour policy to me, not a Conservative policy.
Yeah.
Honestly,
We want less control rather than more.
Spot on.
Do we not think that if the high street has, let's say, past its sell-by date,
which it has,
it's not a functioning entity anymore.
You can't force it to happen.
Then change it.
Yeah, change it, and it is changing. It's morphing. I'm buying a very large department store at the moment, and I've already got a tenant before I've even purchased it for some of it, the ground floor. So you know, it is morphing, it's changing, you know, and it will take time to change. But of course, while there's change going on, as Nick will tell you, there's great opportunities for investors like us to get involved on a very, you know, we're buying, you know, some of these buildings are so cheap. There's a real recession in the commercial property markets in town centres, not so much in market towns and not so much out of town, but certainly in the cities, huge opportunities.
Well, I think there's two issues here. I mean, I just cast my mind back to a particular department store in West 2, which I think was owned by Selfridges at one time, which failed as a huge property, as a retail outlet. But then it was taken over by developers. It was split down. Each floor was split up to probably 10 or 15 different retail units, all leased off, gave a huge diversity of tenants. Great shopping centre, and was successful for many, many years. Yeah. Why? Because they grasped the fact that the thing was in the wrong place. It wasn't right. It wasn't needed. So get rid of it. Change it.
It's all changing. The town centres are all changing, and you know, this happens every 30, 40, 50 years probably. I'm sure. You know, and that's just how it is, isn't it?
Yeah, especially in that space, especially. Yeah. In shopping centres, used to have like large anchor tenants.
Oh, didn't you?
They used to take on, you know, really large amounts, but now not so much, as you said.
I got offered a shopping centre the other day, a smallish one, 80 shops, and I could have bought it for a third of what they refurbished it for 8 years ago. Unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable. But the running of these shopping centres is very, very large. You know, it's a big sum to run them, security, management, cleaning. That's half the problem, isn't it, Nick?
It is indeed, and we've managed them.
But empty rates, of course, unless it's listed, which it wasn't.
But I mean, as you know, we're here in Canary Wharf, and I remember speaking to one of the original directors that was involved in the retail allocations here. And I said to him, you know, it's quite strange actually. You've been very successful with your retail here, and what do you put that down to? And he said, well, rather than look for retail tenants at the highest possible rent, giving them the longest possible leases. What I did, I looked at the demographics of the people that were working within Canary Wharf and said, right, this retail unit would suit these people. It's their market, clever. It's their kind of thing. And we went out to get those people.
Brilliant.
You know, and it's worked. I mean, you will know as a valuer looking at things down here, 15 years ago, this was like a ghost town at weekends. The shops were empty, you know, even Waitrose was empty. Now I think we've got the highest grossing Waitrose in the country. The place is absolutely jam-packed Monday to Sunday.
There's still no parks. So
there is in the
centre. Where do you walk the dog then?
There's a few open spaces.
You don't have a dog?
This is London, John. You know, we need to have many dogs or cows or sheep. You know,
Leave that to me.
And when somebody called me the other week and said, "Oh, I'm mowing my lawn," I said, "So am I. It's the AstroTurf on the on
you
the
just
balcony."
brushed it.
All right. Anyway, there we are. Okay. Well, thank you for that, John. Nicholas, your question. I'm coming to the end of my lease, which is for a retail premises. I've been in the property for 7 years. The landlord's agents tell me that the landlord is only willing to offer me a license rather than a long lease. I'm worried that this would not give my business any level of security. Why would the landlord do this? And is there anything I can do to secure a new lease on a similar basis to before? It smacks to me of a sort of redevelopment clause, one way.
Yes. So just to make your viewers aware, in order to have security of tenure, you have to be inside the Landlord and Tenant Act.
1954.
1954, Part 2. So being outside of that, you don't hold that security.
Well, what puts you
tenure.
inside and what puts you outside?
Well, it's a negotiation to say that you want to be inside the Act. Otherwise, you have to sign a declaration to be outside of the Act. So if you were, you can stay in the property and negotiate a new lease, serve Section 26 notices, and what have you. Now, whereas a license is completely different. It's essentially a lawful right to use the land, and that holds no security, from which usually you can be evicted or terminated at any time.
Yeah, a lot of the maximum sort of 3-year license, isn't it, normally?
Yeah, there is a famous case, Street versus Manford, 1985 or 84, which kind of outlines the differences between a lease and a license. And essentially the rule of thumb, or what came out of that, is anything preceding 6 months on a fixed term over 6 months tends to be a lease rather than a license. But licenses, they're more, if the landlord wants essentially to redevelop, could be one. It's usually used in such, for kind of pop-up shops and things of that nature. So short term can be terminated at any point for a fixed rate. So in this instance, it's quite strange that a landlord is offering a license rather than a lease. So it could be that he's looking to sell on the property for a short period of time, redevelop it, look to get planning, and he doesn't want the tenant to hold that security in order to evict him at the point in which he chooses. So unfortunately, if the gentleman's outside the Act, then he's unable to secure a new lease.
Yeah. Can I just say, 1984 was our heyday, wasn't it? Really, Steve? 1984, when the case Nick was mentioning was probably our heyday. So there you go.
Before my time.
Well, I knew you were going to say that, Nick. Yeah.
I'm going to feel very old now.
Me too.
Very old.
Me too.
Yeah. So if he was within the Act and had a legal right to renew, it would be specified in his main lease document at some point. It would be a sort of addendum. Yeah. Would it be?
There's also something called tenancy at will, which landlords use if a tenant wants to come into the property early to carry out their fit out, or if they're outside of the Act but are in the process of negotiating a new lease, they do a tenancy at will.
Yeah.
So essentially it's an agreement to have the right
but
to
there's
enter the
no
property.
security with that.
No security at all either. So it is essentially a license.
Okay. Do you concur with the probable reasons here, John?
I do, yes. And as an investor, as a landlord investor, the first thing when you're looking to purchase an investment is to find out whether or not the tenant is within the 54 Act or not, because it gives them such security that you've got to offer them a similar lease again when that one runs out. And if you're looking to redevelop it, sometimes there is a redevelopment clause in there. But I've been caught with that a few times. Just because of the redevelopment clause, it's still hard to get the tenant out to redevelop it sometimes. So you need to be really on the ball with it.
And there can be compensation payable as well.
Compensation payable as well, yeah.
Do you know, with a number of our questions today, it seems to me very important. I mean, John's heard me say this many times. I have a thing about leases. I say, you've looked at it, you've signed it. You've looked at it, you've signed it. So why don't we all just do what it says. And I think the real problem is here was when somebody's starting a new business in particular, they're very excited.
Yeah, they're excited.
They're very keen to sign.
Hopefully
on the
they're keen
line.
to sign.
Yeah,
Hopefully they haven't read it all properly.
But that is the
old school. Old school.
Yeah.
Nick's appalled by our attitude. You can tell. Professional person.
Oh,
He's
I think he'd have us in court
Light work.
as soon as looked at us. Okay, well, gentlemen, that's all we've got time for today. So, John Howard, thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure.
Indeed, for coming in. Thank you. Nicholas Zorpides, thank you very much for coming in. Great answers. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.